There's some new merch incoming, some fans are revolting against hero talents, calling them a system, and maybe players are tired of farming legendaries. Hey, it's Soul, and welcome back to Warcraft Weekly, a space where when we're told WoW is dead, we say, not today. Okay, they actually changed it to a skull, cause ooh, big difference, right? Anyway, hit the like button, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live on Twitch, and let's get to what's good. Some folks are feeling the FOMO over this season's legendary, and this week's reveals did not help. It didn't start off that way though. The WoW team announced that the drop rate of the fyr'alath legendary quest item would be increased, which is like, cool. As this hotfix rolled in though, data miners were able to pull a lot of information and dispel a lot of the mystery around the drop rate, so, well, we can get straight to telling you what that is. Now, we gotta keep in mind though that the data that they have and the conclusions that they made are incomplete, but I'm gonna do my best to summarize. Normally, this is information behind the curtain. It's gonna sound confusing because in front of the curtain, the whole mentality is, as the WoW team said, just keep clearing the raid on the highest difficulty that you can do. There are certain cutoffs for heroic and mythic difficulty where after acquiring enough of those greater ember items off of fyr'alath kills, you're pretty much guaranteed to obtain the legendary. For mythic, it's the 7th kill and you'll get the item. For heroic, it's the 15th kill and you're guaranteed to get the item. This happens to be after the first legendary drop, so maybe add a few kills in case you down them early. At the moment, there's no similar cutoff for raid finder or normal kills. The drop rate just keeps rising at this very slow and mostly linear rate. If you're the kind of person who only does at most complete normal difficulty, your drop rate for the legendary is 5.5%, and it's only 2.75% on Raid Finder. Now next week, that rate is going to go up to 6.38% and 3.18% respectively. Now this may shock you, but upon learning this information, some players got mad. Again though, this is data mined information, data miners' findings and conclusions. For all we know, there are unspoken plans to further modify the drop rate so that after, say, 20 greater embers, the drop rate is guaranteed across every difficulty. We're just not seeing it yet because, well, one, no one's supposed to see it, and two, we don't need to see that for like another month or so anyway. The takeaway from this, no matter the outcome though, is that if you still want this weapon, just kill fyr'alath each week. What'll suck is that any new alts that want this weapon, good luck, because they're going to be starting from scratch. In light of the news, there's a lot of chatter about how WoW does such a terrible job at doing legendaries, but let's take a moment to talk about the different ways the game has been doing it. Early on, we had what I would call the guild legendary, where for the most part, very close-knit teams like guilds banded together and collected items to funnel them to just a select few people, as in the favorite people. And we had that kind of thing all the way through Cataclysm. Also during that era, very rare drops like Thoradal and the Glaives of Azeroth, those were only obtainable from raids with no bad luck protection or personal loot, just crazy luck. We then entered an era of legendaries for everyone via quest. We had this during like Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor. Some would argue that having these be very ubiquitous makes these feel not so legendary. These should be like purples instead, but semantics. But the road to obtaining these was still pretty long and, I guess, legendary on its own. I'd also lump in the BFA cloak here, but in that case it was part of the main questline in a later patch and not an optional endeavor. Legion gave us this sort of hybrid of the TBC and the Mists Warlords era with very, very rare legendaries that were also a very critical part of tweaking our classes. This is where bad luck protection was born. It was needed because of how much the right legendaries made our classes play different, feel more fun, or even viable. Later, Shadowlands followed up on this, making the legendaries feel no less required, but exchanged the RNG for an activity and a currency grind. Let's bring it back to Dragonflight. We now have this kind of hybrid scheme based on lessons learned. We have a very rare drop, we have personal loot with respect to trending away from dependence on guilds and social structures. There's bad luck protection, although at the moment certain players are treated way better than others. And there's an epic quest line that only follows after, well, getting the drop. Now that covers most of them, and from comments all over, it sounds like if there was a poll to choose which way to get a legendary is the best one, the winner would most likely be the Mists and Warlords era when everyone got their little prize. I'd imagine if there was like a no legendaries at all option as well, that would be pretty high up on the list too. Now I'd like to hear your takes, like which is your preference, and I have one of my own. It's also not on this list. It's actually pretty wild, but hear me out. We live in a world of seasons, which last for like so many months before it's over, and then we start replacing our gear for the next thing. While a piece of legendary gear could also be updated with the season to keep that item feeling cool and relevant across the expansion, there's a certain FOMO that really drives players' motivations to get that legendary as soon as possible, that way they can enjoy its use for as long as possible. The same goes for like tier or trinkets, but this is an orange weapon, and for some, that hits different. We also live in a world of social media, where information and more importantly, our gripes and complaints can come together like never before. Once upon a time, we'd find a few forum posts to rally together the No Legendaries Club, or some equivalent. It'd be a corner of the internet where people feeling the FOMO don't have to feel alone. But today, these kinds of gatherings are present for all to see, with industries of content creators ready to feed on drama for the clicks, and obviously, I participate in that space, hopefully in my own non-exploitative way. I'm not trying to tell people to not complain or that there aren't any problems with RNG, I'm gonna get to that, but more that the landscape is just different in a way that can create greater influence, but also create this cloud of negativity that can risk spoiling the mood. I'd like to think that we're ready for a new era of legendaries, but by that, I don't mean how to get legendary weapons or armor, but whether a legendary should equate to player power at all. What if the next legendary was only cosmetic? Now, a lot of players right now, a lot of viewers are like, nope. They'd be immediately turned off for sure. There's a reason all the legendaries up until now have had a focus on player power, and they also look very cool too. But after 20 years, how about we try something different, at least this one time? If nothing else, I think we ought to at least entertain this idea with some good discussion. A legendary cosmetic could be a weapon, or a transmog ensemble, or a pet, or a mount, or maybe all of it. Shadowmourne sort of did that with a bunch of cosmetics that came with the weapon, and this legendary, I guess this legendary is really got to be something that draws looks from others, like, oh my god, what's his face is in town because they have some sort of extra ability that changes the whole freaking skybox. Or maybe having this legendary gives you wings and it lets you dragon ride like a Drakthir. Or when you walk around town, random townsfolk appear and they shower you with flowers until you understandably use some sort of option to make them stop doing that all the time. Or what if this legendary weapon transformed into a motorcycle mount? Or while out of combat, it was like this floating pet thing that followed you around and whispered insanity in your ear like, Bruda, sort do. And as for how to obtain this legendary, that's important too, but is it really that important? Because without player power, there's no absolute need for something like bad luck protection, or a guarantee of getting it before the next season, or the expansion, or ever. It's as long as it's there. It just needs to not go away as if it's like a holiday item. Or maybe it should be this really nasty quest line that your warband has to participate in, as in you literally need multiple characters to do it, with a bunch of secrets, and RNG, and gold to spend, but ultimately it's designed for everyone in mind. Dragonflight has embraced the philosophy that not everything has to be made for everyone. Forced participation isn't necessary. We have come a long way from the likes of Azerite essences and Shadowlands legendaries. Legendaries with player power, they are a counter to that philosophy, which isn't necessarily bad, because hey, variety is the spice of life. But maybe as the winds have been changing in gaming, maybe it's time for a different idea, and I'd like to know what you think. Let's change gears for a second and look forward to what's coming in WoW merch. Ew. Not too long ago, we got word of a Chronicles Volume 5 that'll cover the events up to Shadowlands, and that's going to come in the summer. Later this year, there's another Exploring Azeroth, this one covering the Islands of Azeroth, and it'll come from the perspective of Lorthamar and Thalyssra, who are on their honeymoon. We shouldn't expect, intense physical moments, but hey, there might be some fans out there hoping so. Meanwhile, I am definitely projecting. There's also a tarot card set coming later, which I think is a little bit more niche. I tend to think of merch like that as more like larger trading cards, and I'd prefer one of those oversized coffee table books, the kind of thing that folks can flip through. Maybe this ancient practice of inviting guests over to your house, as in physically. But what I find most interesting is an upcoming collection of short stories based on the War Within expansion, and it's going to cover a number of different characters, including Thrall, Ilaria, Anduin, and others. The Amazon pre-order link says it's releasing November 5th, which might be a placeholder. We've seen dates change in the past, but for now, let's presume that these stories will be released after the launch of WoW's next expansion. For years now, fans have dragged Blizzard for revealing story outside of the game, even worse if we gotta pay for it. I'm bringing up that old argument that we should experience the story in the most interactive medium, the World of Warcraft game itself. In fairness, there are a lot of other fans who'd rather not see the WoW team waste their time on exposition or dramatic sequences, and the books lean heavily in that direction. But I look back to the likes of Battle for Azeroth, which, like other expansions, told story in the form of the Warbringer series that were available to all fans at no cost. In addition, they released a pair of short stories, Elegy and A Good War, released digitally as well as in a physical book that came with the collector's edition. So I wonder if that's what's going to happen here, because I feel like reading these upcoming stories is going to be pretty important for the buildup of the War Within expansion. Like, these aren't just side stories, they tie in with very important characters who are going to be involved in this whole saga, and I'd rather not read it after the fact. So here's my hopeful guess. Sometime before the War Within launches, these stories, among other things, are going to be released for fans to build up hype, and it's going to come at no cost. It's going to be on like the website to read, or it might be read to us like the precursors to Legion. Like, those were really cool. But the point is, it's free. There's no cost, because really the goal is to sell expansion boxes. And when the expansion does launch, maybe these books will be part of the collector's edition package, like it'll be a keepsake. Finally, these books will be available a la carte over on Amazon for people who might want the book but don't really care about the entire collector's edition. And it lets Blizzard milk more money, I guess. If that's the plan, I'm kind of all for it, because it checks about all the boxes. Like, fans get the information they need in the medium that they prefer at a reasonable time. The WoW team has been pretty meticulous about lining up the releases of their media, so I'm pretty confident about this one. But it's too bad the game is dead. This is according to some of the backlash against hero talents so far. And it's kind of interesting. Articles from Wowhead gave their best shot at initial takes of these early previews, with just about all of them being decidedly skeptical at best or negative at worst. Now, these are written by individuals who are high performers in their field, so I'm not going to question their takes, but I can't help but feel that they and other fans are looking at these hero talents and making them out to be more than what they actually are. And that's still Blizzard's fault, mind you. The name Hero Talent, along with the heavy themes around the specialization names, it creates a lot of expectation that, unfortunately, for the sake of reasonable balance and gameplay, is not going to be fulfilled the way that we want them to. There's a lot that we still don't know, let alone have tested, and I don't want to be that guy who's like, hey guys, it's gonna be fine when it goes live, because this negative feedback is good. It's paying off. The other day, the WoW team responded to the feedback around the Oracle specialization for priests, and they're going to see what they can rework. So the WoW team is paying attention. That's the whole point of these early previews. What I'd like to share with you, though, is how I'm looking at these hero specs, because I'm observing again that some critics and even guide writers are trying to elevate these to be more than what they're meant to be, and then tear them down based on these inflated expectations. I'll let Ian explain in this clip.
So, at their core, this is a chance for us, as we continue to evolve and advance our class system, to explore some deeper class fantasies, to look at iconic archetypes like the Farseer or the Dark Ranger or the Mountain King, or others often inspired by major heroes in the Warcraft universe, other times by fantasies that we've heard are really resonant with players, and focus the continued expansion of our classes in that space. Now, Morgan said this yesterday, just to restate, this is a completely flexible system. It's as flexible as your current talents and specs. Nothing like covenants or anything like that. Anytime you could change your talents today, you can change your hero spec, you can swap around your hero talents. They're just talents. They're just talents. They're just talents.
All right, there's a bit to unpack, but I'm sharing my understanding here that these really are just talents. Let's take a look at the current talent tree. I'm going to use the Wowhead version because this illustrates this very well. In order to progress down to lower levels of the tree, one has to spend 8 points to access the next, and then a total of 20 points to access the bottom. This is so we don't try to just shoot to the bottom and then pick up every capstone. It's easy to feel a little overwhelmed when first looking at hero talents. I mean, after all, the only thing that we're doing is looking at them. We can't test them against target dummies. We don't have a second hero spec to compare them to. Now, months from now though, we're going to be in the war within. We'll be at max level, and we'll be playing with our talents to discover the build that works best for us. Without a second spec, we can't do a great job of simulating the mental headspace of being at max level, but I'm going to try to show you how I'm looking at these hero specs. So here's one of the specs on screen. Of course, I happen to choose a paladin. We know that hero talents open up at level 71, and then by the time we hit level 80, we'll have all the talents for all of our hero specs. We can also choose between 2 of the hero specs, so I'm going to clone this on the side and we'll pretend that's a thing and, kind of leave it alone. 4 of these talents here that you see are choice nodes, where we can pick between one of 2 options. Everything else is basically a passive that you get when choosing this spec, to a point where, well, visually all of this is kind of extra dressing. For the purpose of unpacking and giving feedback, seeing all these different perks is great, but once we've really got this in our hands and have played with these a bit, here's a better mental picture of what our experience is going to be like. We can think of the 2 hero specs as just a bottom row on the spec talent tree, requiring all previous expansions points to be spent before getting here. Once we make one of 2 choices between hero specs that give a bunch of perks that have our spec lean in one direction or another. And this is followed by a number of choice nodes, in this example 4 of them, to tweak our spec a little bit more. What I'm trying to do here is reassure folks that while hero specs are deep and add a new layer of complexity to our class customization, they're not going to be quite as overwhelming as some may think. Now, on the other end, while some individual perks may seem a bit passive or underwhelming, you gotta just smash them all together and then take a second look. Now, you might still find them to be boring, and if so, say it. I just hope that this little perspective shift helps a bit, because I've noticed some folks getting confused about what hero specs are versus how we're most likely to play with them in practice. They really are just talents. They're isolated to avoid the bloat that used to happen with earlier expansions talents when players had more points to spend in trees than it was intended, and the developers had to rebalance trees with respect to all those extra points. And you are free to resume your thrashing. In the meantime, yeah, I'm also anxious to have a second specialization to bounce off of, and with that I can do some better mental simulations of what it's going to be like to play with these recipes, and of course give feedback. That's going to be the show, and I want to thank our folks over on Twitch for being a sport. As I tried out Last Epoch, or Epic, or however that's pronounced, it wasn't bad. I wasn't blown away like some of the hype suggests, but the gameplay feels solid and the systems look like they can get really deep. We're likely to get back to our usual WoW streaming next week unless I manage to finish the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then I might jump into some new stuff. Of course, we've also got to give thanks to our very, very supportive patrons, and to you, viewer. You made it to the end, you fed the algorithm. So please like the video to support the channel, subscribe for more, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.